Minus 60 degrees heat. That is not the record low. That is a regular Tuesday night in interior Alaska in January. A tiny cabin at that temperature is not a shelter in the way most people think of shelter. It is a thin wooden box separating you from an environment that will archive an unprotected human being in under 30 minutes. The average person preparing for a night in a remote Alaskan cabin makes the same mistake. They focus on the cabin. They stuff the stove. They pile blankets on the bed. They think about the structure. Smart Alaskans think about the person. What follows is what they actually know. 7 specific things that experienced Alaskan cabin dwellers have worked out over decades of brutal winters. And 5 mistakes that put newcomers in danger every single season. None of it requires expensive gear. None of it requires survival course. All of it was figured out by people who stayed, paid attention, and adjusted. Dan has spent years in subarctic conditions, studying exactly what keeps a person alive and functional at temperatures that most of the country will never experience. This is what he learned. The beginner's instinct is to heat the cabin. Crank the wood stove as high as it will go. Get the interior temperature up to something comfortable. Treat the cabin like a house with central heating that just needs time to catch up. This instinct will burn through your supply in 3 days and still leave you cold at 3 in the morning. Here is what is actually happening at minus 60 degrees Celsius outside. A tiny cabin is losing heat through every surface simultaneously. The walls, the roof, the floor, every gap around the doorframe, every imperfect window seal. The stove is fighting all of it at once, and it is losing. The moment the fire dies down, the cabin temperature begins dropping immediately. At minus 60 degrees Celsius exterior, an unheated small cabin reaches lethal interior temperatures in under 4 hours. Smart Alaskans do not try to win that fight. They change the battlefield. They heat the person. The cabin gets warm enough to be survivable. The sleeping system takes care of the rest. The setup is specific. A sleeping area physically separated from the main cabin space. A curtain, a partial wall, a low partition. Anything that traps body heat in a smaller volume of air around the sleeping zone. Inside that zone, a sleeping bag rated to minus 40 degrees Celsius or lower. Around the sleeping bag, a wool blanket envelope that adds a second insulating layer and captures any heat that escapes the bag. Inside the bag, 2 metal hot water bottles, one at the feet, one at the core, filled just before sleep from water boiled on the stove. Inside the bag with the sleeper, tomorrow's base layer, socks, thermal underwear, inner gloves, warm in the morning because they spent the night absorbing body heat. The stove holds a cabin above freezing. The sleeping system holds a person above dying. The newcomer who tries to sleep comfortably in a fully heated cabin burns twice the wood, wakes up at 3 a.m. when the fire dies, and finds himself in a minus 30 degrees Celsius interior with a sleeping bag that was never asked to do the job it was built for. The cabin is not the target. You are. Heat accordingly. A stove that goes cold at 2 a.m. in a minus 60 degrees Celsius exterior is not an inconvenience. It is a countdown. From the moment the fire dies, the interior temperature of a small, uninsulated cabin begins dropping toward the outside temperature. At minus 60 degrees Celsius exterior, that drop is not gradual. It is aggressive. Within 2 hours, the interior can fall below minus 20 degrees Celsius. Within 4, below minus 35 degrees Celsius. A sleeping bag rated to minus 20 degrees Celsius that was sufficient an hour ago is no longer sufficient. The person inside it is now in danger and they are asleep. Every breath released inside a small cabin adds water vapor to the air. Every pot of food cooked on the stove adds more. Every wet boot brought through the door. Every damp outer layer hung on a nail. Every cup of coffee left steaming on the table. All of it is loading the cabin air with moisture that has nowhere to go. At minus 60 degrees Celsius exterior, that moisture does not stay airborne for long. It hits the walls and freezes. It builds an ice layer on the interior surfaces that grows thicker every day the cabin is occupied. When the stove runs hot, that ice layer melts. It drips onto bedding. It soaks into gear. It saturates the base of the walls and works its way into the insulation behind them. A sleeping bag with moisture in its insulation loses between 50 and 70% of its thermal performance. A bag that was keeping a person alive at minus 40 degrees Celsius is now only keeping them alive at minus 15 degrees Celsius. The temperature did not change. The moisture changed everything. Smart Alaskans treat moisture as a daily discipline. Wet boots, gloves, and outer layers go in the entryway or vestibule, never in the sleeping area. Cooking is done with lids on pots. A small vent is cracked during cooking and for 20 minutes after. The sleeping bag is open and aired every morning before the cabin cools. If ice is already built up on the interior walls, it does not get chipped off while the stove is cold. The cabin warms first. The melt happens slowly. Old towels and rags placed at the base of the walls catch the water before it reaches the floor and the gears stacked along it. Temperature is the obvious enemy. Moisture is the one that has been building since the first night. Manage it daily, or it manages you. Every person who arrives in interior Alaska for the first time treats minus 60 degrees Celsius as the enemy. The people who live there for decades treat it as a resource. The cold outside a well-managed cabin is the most reliable utility in the world. It does not require electricity. It does not require fuel. It does not fail. It runs at full capacity every night from November through March, and it costs nothing to use. Smart Alaskans use it deliberately. Anything that needs to stay frozen goes into the unheated vestibule or an outdoor cache. The exterior at minus 60 degrees Celsius is a freezer that no appliance on the market can match for consistency or operating cost. Meat, fish, dairy, anything that would spoil above freezing, stored outside, perfectly preserved for the entire winter. Water comes from snow. A large metal pot packed with clean snow is placed just inside the door, away from the stove, where the cabin's ambient warmth melts it slowly through the day without burning extra fuel. By evening, the pot is full of water. The stove did not work harder to produce it. Hot food that needs to be cooled and stored goes outside for 8 minutes. At minus 60 degrees Celsius, a full pot of cooked food reaches safe storage temperature faster than any refrigerator ever built. Before sleep, cracking the cabin door for 90 seconds drops the interior temperature by 2 to 3 degrees. A slightly cooler starting temperature means a bank stove has marginally less work to do maintaining survivable heat through the night. The bank lasts longer. The wood supply lasts longer. The cold is not the problem to be solved. It is a tool that has been sitting outside the door the entire time. AT minus 60 degrees Celsius. The warmest place in the cabin is inside the sleeping bag, not near the stove, not under an extra blanket on the cot, inside the bag, pressed against the body, surrounded by trapped heat that took hours to build up and will take hours to dissipate. Smart Alaskans know this, so they put everything that needs to work in the morning inside the bag the night before. A headlamp left on the shelf overnight at minus 60 degrees Celsius ambient temperature is a dead headlamp at 5 a.m. Lithium batteries lose up to 95% of their capacity at extreme cold. Alkaline batteries fare worse. The headlamp looks fine. It will not turn on. The one piece of equipment needed to start the morning fire, to check the stove, to navigate the cabin before sunrise, rendered useless by 8 hours on a shelf. Lighter fluid gels at extreme cold. A standard lighter left at ambient temperature will not produce a flame. A backup match supply in a container that was not kept warm will struggle to strike. The fire starting tools fail at exactly the moment a cold cabin most needs a fire started. Boot liners left outside the bag overnight stiffen completely. Putting them on requires 20 minutes of body heat before they flex enough to walk in normally. Everything critical goes inside the bag. The headlamp, the lighter and backup matches in a waterproof case, the boot liners, any medication that cannot freeze, tomorrow's base layer, socks, thermal underwear, inner gloves. The sleeping bag is not just where rest happens. At minus 60 degrees Celsius, it is the only warm environment in the cabin. It is a charging station, a gear locker, and a thermal safe. Treat it accordingly. The storm does not give you a maintenance window. That is the single most important thing to understand about extreme cold events in interior Alaska. A 4-day freeze at minus 60 degrees Celsius does not pause while you check the chimney. It does not wait while you locate the door or weather stripping you should have installed in October. It does not hold while you realize the wood stack outside is 2 days short of what you need. Everything that is wrong with the cabin when the storm arrives stays wrong for the duration. Smart Alaskans do the inspection before the cold front moves in, not the morning it arrives, not the night before, days before, when the temperature is still manageable, and every problem identified is a problem that can actually be fixed. The walkthrough is specific. Check the stovepipe and chimney cap for ice blockage and creosote buildup. A blocked chimney with a bank stove is a carbon monoxide event that happens while the occupant is asleep. Check the door. A door that does not seat fully against its frame is a gap that bleeds heat for the entire storm. Check the wood supply. Below a 5-day reserve means the storm has leverage over you. Check every water container that can freeze and burst. Check the sleeping bag for moisture in the insulation by compressing it and feeling for cold, dense patches where the loft should be. A damp bag identified before the storm can be dried. A damp bag identified at 3 a.m. during the storm cannot. Read the cabin before the cold reads it for you. Mistake 1. The cabin is at minus 40 degrees Celsius interior when you arrive. The impulse is immediate and completely understandable. Pack the firebox as full as it will go. Get the temperature up as fast as possible. Treat the stove like an engine that just needs more fuel to produce more output. This is a mistake that ends stoves and starts chimney fires. An overfired stove in a small cabin drives stovepipe temperatures far beyond what the installation was designed to handle. Materials near the pipe that have been safe for years are suddenly at ignition proximity. Door gaskets that were sealing correctly warp and fail. Stove components that expand too fast crack. The firebox that was going to keep you alive for the next 3 winters is now compromised after one bad night. The correct method is deliberate and slow. Start with dry kindling and small splits. Build a small hot fire and hold it there for 30 to 45 minutes. Let the stove come up to operating temperature gradually. Let the metal expand at the rate it was designed to expand. Then load normally. The cabin warms more slowly. 30 minutes longer, maybe 45. The stove survives the season. The chimney stays clean. The gaskets hold. Arriving cold at a cold cabin feels like an emergency. It is not. It is a Tuesday in Alaska. Treat the stove accordingly. Mistake 2. Propane is a reasonable answer to cold weather down to a certain temperature. That temperature is approximately minus 42 degrees Celsius. Below that point, propane does not behave like a fuel. It behaves like a liquid that refuses to vaporize. A propane tank stored outside at minus 60 degrees Celsius will not flow. The pressure inside the tank drops below the threshold needed to push gas through the regulator. The heater connected to it produces nothing. A tank stored inside a cold cabin fares marginally better. But a cabin cold enough to need emergency heating is a cabin cold enough to compromise propane vaporization. The system fails at the exact moment it is most needed. There is a second problem that has nothing to do with temperature. Propane combustion consumes oxygen. In a small, tightly sealed cabin with minimal ventilation, exactly the kind of cabin that exists in remote Alaska, oxygen depletion becomes a risk before carbon monoxide levels reach detector thresholds. The occupant gets drowsy. Judgment degrades. The connection between the symptom and the cause is not obvious at 2 a.m. in a cold cabin, which does not have a minimum operating temperature. A properly banked birch fire produces heat at minus 60 degrees Celsius with the same reliability it produces heat at minus 10 degrees Celsius. Propane has its uses in Alaskan cabins. Supplemental cooking. Moderate temperature backup. It is not the primary heat source at extreme cold. It was never designed to be. Mistake 3. The door looks closed. It is not sealed. There is a difference, and at minus 60 degrees Celsius, that difference is measured in degrees per hour inside the cabin. A door that contacts a frame on 3 sides but gaps on the 4th is not a minor imperfection. It is a continuous cold air channel that runs all night, every night, working directly against everything the stove is trying to accomplish. A gap of a 1/4 inch around a door frame at minus 60 degrees Celsius exterior allows enough cold infiltration to drop interior temperatures 15 to 20 degrees below what the stove can sustain. The stove runs harder. The wood burns faster. The cabin stays colder than it should. The occupant wakes up cold and blames the stove or the quality or the sleeping bag. The door never gets examined. The test is simple. Hold a lighter or a candle flame close to the door perimeter with the door closed. Anywhere the flame moves toward the door, cold air is coming in. Mark every gap. Seal each one with foam weather stripping before the next cold night. This check takes 10 minutes. It costs less than $5 in materials. It is the highest return on investment maintenance task in any Alaskan cabin. Check it every fall before the cold season begins. Recheck it after any major temperature swing that causes a cabin frame to contract and shift. The door that looked closed last March may not be sealed in November. Mistake 4. More layers feels like more warmth. The physics disagrees. A high-quality cold weather sleeping bag works by trapping dead air inside its insulation. That dead air, warmed by the body, creates a thermal buffer between the sleeper and the exterior cold. The loft of the insulation, the thickness and fluffiness of the fill, is what creates the space for that dead air to exist. Pile enough clothing layers inside that bag, and the loft compresses. The dead airspace collapses. The insulation that was doing the work is now packed flat and doing almost none of it. The bag rated to minus 40 degrees Celsius is now performing somewhere closer to minus 15 degrees Celsius, and the sleeper does not know it until the coldest hour of the night. The second failure is moisture. Overlayering causes sweating during the first hours of sleep, before the body settles into its resting temperature. That sweat enters the base layers and from there into the bag's insulation. Wet insulation loses thermal performance rapidly and does not recover until it is fully dried, which cannot happen inside a cold cabin on a cold night. The correct approach is one moisture-wicking base layer inside the bag, a hot water bottle, pre-warming the interior before the sleeper gets in. The bag does the work it was engineered to do without interference. The instinct to add more is understandable. At minus 60 degrees Celsius, every instinct points toward more. More wood, more layers, more heat. The bag needs less. Give it less. Mistake 5. The forecast said minus 45 degrees Celsius. The newcomer prepared for minus 45 degrees Celsius. The cabin sits in a valley bottom in interior Alaska where cold air pools on calm, clear nights, dropping the actual temperature 15 to 20 degrees below the forecasted region. The weather station that produced that forecast is 40 miles away at a higher elevation. It measured minus 45 degrees Celsius accurately. At the cabin, it is minus 62 degrees Celsius. The newcomer's preparation, calibrated to the forecast, is not calibrated to the actual night. Forecasts in remote interior Alaska carry error margins that would be unacceptable in any other context where the stakes are this high. Wind chill is inconsistently factored. Microclimates created by terrain, tree cover, and elevation change produce conditions that no regional forecast captures accurately. Smart Alaskans do not prepare for the forecast. They prepare for 15 degrees colder than the forecast. If the forecast says minus 45 degrees Celsius, the preparation is for minus 60 degrees Celsius. The cost of that extra preparation is a few additional logs in the stove and one more hot water bottle filled at bedtime. The cost of underpreparing is not measured in comfort. Dan's rule is simple. The forecast tells you what the sky expects. The cabin tells you what is actually happening. Check the thermometer outside the door. Prepare for what it says, not what the phone says. Trust the cabin. It has never been wrong about the temperature it is sitting in. Minus 60 degrees Celsius. Not a warning. A conditions report. Smart Alaskans read it, assess it, and respond to it with the same calm they bring to every other Tuesday in January. Not because they are fearless, because they have done the work that fear would have them skip. None of the 12 things in this script are complicated. Heat the person, not the cabin. Bank the fire every single night. Seal the floor before the walls. Manage moisture as a daily discipline. Use the cold outside as a utility it actually is. Sleep with everything critical inside the bag. Read the cabin before the storm arrives, not during it. The people who figured this out were not experts with expensive equipment and formal training. They were people who stayed in the cold long enough to understand it, who made the mistakes once and did not make them again, who paid attention when the cabin told them something was wrong. The knowledge belongs to the cold. It was extracted from it over generations of Alaskan winters by ordinary people who had no option but to learn it correctly. The cold does not care about your preparation, but it rewards it every single time.